everyone, welcome back to the Stitches and Scribbles channel. My name is Erin and I've got a reading podcast for you today. This is going to be going over everything that I read in the month of April 2025, and I actually don't have much else to show you for this one. I've been pretty good lately about not picking up books from little libraries or purchasing books unless I think I'm going to immediately read them, so I actually don't even have a book haul to show you today. I'm really trying to focus on getting my physical TBR down, especially towards the end of the month of April. I did read a lot of digital books during April, or books that weren't mine. They were borrowed from either the library or from a friend. So going into May now, I really want to try to get my physical TBR worked down a little bit, because I would say there's at least 50 books in my physical TBR that I haven't read yet. So that will be my goal for the next month. And I'll have to let you know how I did with that. But with that being said, I actually don't have a lot of physical books to even show you today. Most of the ones I'm going to be talking about and reviewing, I'm going to be showing you on my Storygraph account, because they either belong to the school that I work at, or belong to a friend, or have already been given to somebody else to borrow. I don't know if there's any in that category for this month, actually, but a lot of the books are not mine. So I only have 2 physical books that I will be showing you today, and the rest I will have to show you from my phone. I also did not read as many books in April as I did in March, and part of that was because we had our spring break in March, so I went through a lot of books in that 1 week. And for a lot of April, I was not really in the habit of reading on a daily basis. And that's also something that I want to try to change going into the end of the school year, is I am kind of taking a little bit of time after school to sit and read for at least a half an hour before doing other things, because I think it's been really relaxing the last couple days I've tried it. So my reading did pick up a little bit towards the end of April, but not enough to like jump my book totals for that month. I think by the end of April I had finished 41 books total for the year, so it wasn't as many as I typically read in a month, but I'm working on getting back on track with that. The first book I read in April was one that I borrowed through Libby, and it was None of This Is True by Lisa Jewell. To be honest, now that I've pulled it up, now I remember what it was about. If I had just looked at the cover, I couldn't have told you what the book was about, because I would not have remembered. I find that a lot with thrillers, that I don't remember what they're actually about based on the title. I have to reread the synopsis to remember what it's about. Just because a lot of times in thrillers, the title has kind of nothing to do with the story. They're all kind of generally the same kind of buzzwordy titles. And this was definitely one of those, but I really liked this book. I'll go ahead and read the synopsis for you. Celebrating her 45th birthday at her local pub, popular podcaster Alex Summer crosses paths with an unassuming woman called Josie Fair. Josie, it turns out, is also celebrating her 45th birthday. They are, in fact, birthday twins. A few days later, Alex and Josie bump into each other again, this time outside Alex's children's school. Josie has been listening to Alex's podcast and thinks she might be an interesting subject for her series. She is, she tells Alex, on the cusp of great changes in her life. Josie's life appears to be strange and complicated, and although Alex finds her unsettling, she can't quite resist the temptation to keep making the podcast. Slowly, she starts to realize that Josie has been hiding some very dark secrets, and before she knows it, Josie has inveigled her way into Alex's life, that's a funny word, and into her home. But as quickly as she arrived, Josie disappears. Only then does Alex discover that Josie has left a terrible and terrifying legacy in her wake, and that Alex has become the subject of her own true crime podcast, with her life and her family's lives under mortal threat. Who is Josie Fair, and what has she done? One of the things I really liked about this book is that it's told in snippets that kind of jump backwards and forwards in time. So sometimes you get the actual text of the story. Sometimes you get the transcript of the podcast, and sometimes you get a transcript of the true crime documentary that was filmed after the events of the book take place. So it was a really interesting way to read the story. It felt very much like reading a true crime documentary, where they're pulling in sound bites from phone calls and podcast episodes and reading text messages and things like that. It was a really engaging book, really, really good, really well written. And I totally just picked it up because it was immediately available on my Libby account. So again, that was None of This Is True by Lisa Jewell. I know that she's been really popular in the kind of thriller side of book talk fairly recently. But I believe this is the first of her books that I've read. I'm not entirely sure about that though. The second book that I finished in the month of April was An Exorcist More Stories by Father Gabriel Amorth. I read the first volume of his work, I think in February or March. It was definitely earlier in the year, but this was one of my adoration books. I've mentioned this a couple times on my podcast, but I am a practicing Catholic and I have been trying to make it a goal to go to adoration once a week. And adoration is when you sit in quiet prayer in front of the exposed and blessed Eucharist. So we believe that you're truly sitting in the presence of Christ. And I find that my best way to stay kind of focused and present is by reading. So I generally bring a Catholic book with me, and this was one of my picks for this month. I'm going to more talk about the first book because this is kind of just a continuation. But Father Gabriel Amorth was the exorcist for the Vatican for many years. So he is basically creating a case file of things that he witnessed, experienced, dealt with as a Vatican exorcist in Rome. And this is just a continuation of those stories. So it goes back and forth between actual recounts of cases that he dealt with and kind of the theology behind what he was dealing with. So excellent read. Definitely a little on the dry side. I struggled more with this one than with the first one, even though these were both a reread for me. I think part of it is that it's translated, so it doesn't quite have the same tone as it would have in the original. I guess he would have written it in Italian. But still very good, very theologically dense. So if that's what you're looking for, this is a great series to pick up. There are 3 of them. I do own all 3, but I think I'm going to take a break from them and do some of my other books in my physical TBR during adoration over the next couple of months. The next book that I read was one from my school library. This was Ungifted by Gordon Corman. I read this because one of my students said it was one of her favorite books and that I should check it out because I told her I hadn't read any of Gordon Corman's books. He is quite a prolific middle grade author, so I knew I was going to need to check him out at some point. And I have mixed feelings about this one, so I'll go ahead and read the synopsis for this one and then kind of tell you my thoughts on it. When Donovan Curtis pulls a major prank at his middle school, he thinks he's finally gone too far. But thanks to a mix-up by one of the administrators, instead of getting in trouble, Donovan is sent to an Academy of Scholastic Distinction, a special program for gifted and talented students. Although it wasn't exactly what Donovan had intended, the ASD couldn't be a more perfectly unexpected hideout for someone like him. But as the students and teachers of ASD grow to realize that Donovan may or may not be good at math or science, or just about anything, he shows that his gifts may be exactly what the ASD students never knew they needed. I loved the kid characters in this book. I think the author did a really good job of making believable middle school aged characters. And therefore, I understand why kids like it. However, I, reading it as an adult, felt kind of conflicted. Not so much to the point that, I'm considering pulling it from the library, but it's not a book that I would reach for to recommend to kids. I think if kids have found it on their own, sure, fine, they can read it. But I did have a couple problems with it. The first of which being that there are several instances where a student is doing something inappropriate that I don't think really added to the story, nor was it necessary to the plot line. It was just kind of thrown in there as a comedic effect, including a situation where a student is doing something inappropriate to a teacher that then gets filmed and put on YouTube. And I struggle with defending books that include that kind of content, because I think it's, especially since this was done by a character who's not painted in a bad light throughout the rest of the book, I think it's basically telling kids that that kind of behavior was okay. And in the case of this particular instance, it was something that I think would end up with a pretty strong legal case if it actually happened, because of the nature of the event. And I'm not going to go into much detail about what it was, but there were a couple instances throughout the book like that, of inappropriate content was put in there for comedic effect when it really wasn't funny, and it towed the line of, is this just inappropriate or is this harassment? And I think that that's a really odd thing to put in a children's book. I kind of want to reach out to a couple of other educator groups that I'm a part of online and ask if they've had similar issues with this book, because I know that this book and this author are both really popular, but I'm kind of struggling to see the merits of this book other than its accurate portrayal of middle school students. And I will say both of these things are things that, or the instances that I'm referring to in the book are things that a middle school student would realistically do. So I'm not debating that it's unrealistic. It's more of a, why are we encouraging this by painting it in a light that it's purely funny and there's no consequences for it. If the student who had done this had gotten in trouble to a degree that was appropriate for what happened, I maybe would be feeling differently about it. But I would say if your child or a child in your life is considering reading these books, I think it needs to come with a conversation. And I think it needs to come with a pre-read from a trusted adult first. I also think that because the student in question, and a lot of the students in this book are above average intelligence, they kind of get away with stuff like this, and I don't think that that's acceptable either. So I would kind of treat this one with caution. I did like the characters. I think that there were some truly funny moments in the book, but it was one that just left a really bad taste in my mouth. So I'd be careful with this one. I know I just said that I didn't think I was going to pull it from the library, but now that I'm kind of reflecting on it, I think I need to think further about this one, and possibly check the rest of the books that we have by this author. So just kind of keep that in mind if you have younger people in your life who are reading it. Moving on to the next book I read. This was a digital book, so I don't have the physical copy. This was The Girls' Weekend by Jodi Gehrman. This one I didn't like as much as the Lisa Jewell book that I just talked about, but it was still kind of a quick read thriller. Synopsis for this one. June Moody, a 30-something English professor, just wants to get away from her recent breakup and reunite with girlfriends over summer break. Her old friend and longtime nemesis, Sadie McTavish, a mega-successful author, invites June and her college friends to a baby shower at her sprawling estate in the San Juan Islands. June is less than thrilled to spend time with Sadie and her husband, June's former crush, but agrees to go. The party gets off to a shaky start when old grudges resurface, but when they wake the next morning, they find something worse. Sadie is missing, the house is in shambles, and bloodstains mar the staircase. None of them has any memory of the night before. Everyone's a suspect. Since June had a secret rendezvous with Sadie's husband, she has plenty of reason to suspect herself. Apparently, so do the cops. And then the rest is just reviews. This one was okay. It was still engaging enough to finish reading. If you're a thriller reader, I feel like with reading thrillers, they kind of don't have to be good. It's more of just getting through a fast-paced novel that keeps you out of your reading slump. But this one wasn't fantastic. I gave it 4 stars. I think if I had to rate it again, it would be more like 3.5. I feel like the twists in this one were at times very predictable and at times too over the top, to the point of where it didn't feel realistic anymore. It's also a lot of like high school level girl drama from women in their late 30s, which is kind of a weird vibe. So it was okay. Again, I got that one just because it was immediately available on Libby, but I wouldn't necessarily recommend it. The next one I read was actually a suggestion from one of my coworkers, and it is a parenting book, but she said that she appreciated it as a teacher in talking to kids about technology. So this was Raising Upright Kids in an Upside Down World, Defying Anti-Parent Culture by Ray Guarendi. I really liked this book. So it, when was it published? Published in 2019, so it's not that old. Definitely like addressed a lot of social media things. And for this one, I don't feel the need to read the synopsis because it's a nonfiction book. But the author kind of goes through a lot of arguments for and against having kids have access to technology and what kind of the effects are on kids and on families. And I enjoyed reading it because it made me feel very secure in how I have chosen to teach technology as a teacher. In that I really don't feel like kids need to do everything on a screen, despite the fact that I'm the person who's teaching them technology. I think learning how to type is important. I think learning how to use tools to do their schoolwork and projects is important. But I don't think that they need to be doing everything online, nor does it mean that unrestricted internet access is the way of the future. I still think that, like with everything, kids need guidance in what's appropriate for them to be consuming online. No differently than the way they consume television or books or media, that everything kind of comes with a certain level of maturity, and it's important to be kind of ahead of what students or your own children may be consuming online. So it was a really helpful guide. Again, more just kind of reinforced some of the things that I already felt about having kids be so plugged in. That it was just very reassuring in how I have chosen to teach technology and how I hope to be an asset to the school that I work for in that department. So that was definitely a quick read, but still very good. The last, oh no, there's 2 more books. No, 3 more books. Okay. The last physical book that I read for this month was My Calamity Jane, and this is in the Lady Janie's series by Jody Meadows, Brody Ashton, and Cynthia Hand. Synopsis on the back just says, the side-splitting, whopper-filled, not-so-tall tale of the one and only Calamity Jane. Welcome to the Wild West, where Calamity Jane, Frank the Pistol Prince Butler, and Annie Oakley herself are out to cure the American frontier of a situation so hairy that it's downright wolfy. This concept for these books is that they take a literary or historical character and add a fantasy element to their story. So the first book in the series was My Lady Jane, where there are characters that can turn into animals. The second one was Jane Eyre, which included some very real ghosts based off of the Jane Eyre story. And with Calamity Jane, it's werewolves. So this so far has been my least favorite book in this series. And there are 3 more in the Mary series that kind of have the same concept. I've never been a werewolf person. It's not my favorite trope to go with. Same thing with vampires. I'm not a vampire person either. This one was the hardest one for me to get into. I don't know if it's because it was a Western or because I didn't like the characters as much, but I ended up having to alternate this one between reading the text and reading the audiobook because I was just really struggling to get through it. I'm hoping that some of the Mary ones are better, but this one definitely was my least favorite of the series so far. Lady Jane was definitely, Jane Grey was still my favorite character, and that was the first one. So I have high hopes for the Mary series, but this one was kind of a letdown for me. I didn't like the characters as much. I did really like Annie Oakley, but everyone else in the books I kind of couldn't care less about. So that was a little bit disappointing for this one. I gave it 3.5 stars. I still finished it eventually, but it took me a really long time to get there. The next one I read was America's Mary, the story of Our Lady of Good Help by Marge Steinhage Fenelon. And this is about Our Lady of Champion, which was a Marian apparition that happened in Champion, Wisconsin. This was more just a historical timeline of those events and all the people involved and kind of the history of the area. So just a good overview of the events that happened. I read this because my husband and I visited Our Lady of Champion when we had our spring break trip up into Door County. So this was just kind of filling in the gaps of stuff that I had learned while we were there. It was a really good book, well written. This was also one of my adoration books that I read for this month. Then the last one, for real this time, that I read this month was a reread for me, but the first time I read it, I was in early high school, so I did not remember it at all, and this was one that I borrowed from a friend. But it was the Guernsey Literary and Potato Peel Pie Society by Annie Barrows and Mary Ann Schaefer. And I know this was made into a movie not too long ago, so I'm now very curious to watch the movie. Description for this one: January 1946, London is emerging from the shadow of the Second World War, and writer Juliet Ashton is looking for her next book subject. Who could imagine that she would find it in a letter from a man she's never met, a native of the island of Guernsey, who has come across her name written inside a book by Charles Lamb. As Juliet and her new correspondent exchange letters, Juliet is drawn into the world of this man and his friends. And what a wonderfully eccentric world it is. The Guernsey Literary and Potato Peel Pie Society, born as a spur-of-the-moment alibi when its members were discovered breaking curfew by the Germans occupying their island, boasts a charming, funny, deeply human cast of characters, from pig farmers to phrenologists, literature lovers all. Juliet begins a remarkable correspondence with the Society's members, learning about their island, their taste in books, and the impact the recent German occupation has had on their lives. Captivated by their stories, she sets sail for Guernsey, and what she finds will change her forever. So this book was told entirely in letters, which was very interesting. I did have a little trouble keeping track of some of the characters as I was reading, but I really loved the juxtaposition in this book of very hard historical facts with very amusing and charming small moments of this cast of characters in the literary society. Everything from very dramatic recountings of kind of neighborhood gossip to really accurate depictions of what it was like living in Guernsey during the German occupation. But it was a really good read. I am really curious to watch the movie now, so I will be looking forward to that sometime in the near future. But that's it for this month. So not as many books as usual. I think I only read, was it 8 or 9 this month versus I think it was 13 last month. But I'm still satisfied with that amount of reading and where I'm at so far for the year. And I think that's going to be it for this episode of the podcast. Thank you so much for watching. If you're interested in seeing other crafty stuff and book-related things I do here on this channel, make sure you hit the subscribe button down below. I usually upload videos on Saturdays. Once a month, I talk about all the books I read in the previous month. Once a month, I do kind of a crafting update on what I've been working on, and then the other videos are just kind of whatever I'm up to that month. If you want to follow me on other social media sites, that information will be in the description box. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye, everyone.